Damien, we're live. Yep.
Should be.
Yep. Right. Yep.
Right. Kia ora and welcome everybody to the Risk and Insurance Committee meeting. First for myself, so I'd just like to say thank you for appointing me, and I'm really looking forward to working with you all. Certainly Risk and Insurance is something quite dear to my heart that I've been involved in for pretty much most of my career. So I'm sort of looking forward to bringing my skill set and knowledge to the organisation and to these committee discussions. So very much looking forward to it.
Yes. Well, welcome again, and we're looking forward to gaining from your expertise. You've been here before. This is your first official meeting, so welcome.
Appreciate it. Great. So we'll just dive straight into the agenda. So apologies, we have away today Councillor Gibson and Councillor Morrison, but we do have, I was checking before I came, quorum of 4 required for the committee, and we have that, so we're all good to go. Declarations of interest. So I did put mine forward the other day, so as I'm new to the committee, so I've registered mine. But just checking after people have read the pack today, if there's anything else anyone wants to mention. No, that sounds right. We just note them, or do we move? No. We do move the apologies. Okay, right. Can I have a Jeremy? Thank you. And thank you. Are there any other ones that need to be? No. Okay, great. Right.
Alistair.
What else do we Public forum, and no one offered to talk from the public today. Confirmation of minutes. So certainly has been valuable for myself, as I was not at the last committee, so it was actually, so we see the benefit in having these put forward, so that you have a look at those. Does anyone have anything to add? Otherwise, can I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Yeah.
Jeremy and Lyndall, thank you. Notification of extraordinary and urgent business. I don't believe anything has come to our attention for that item. And questions. I don't believe we have received any questions. If anyone's aware. And so Chairman and Councillors report. So I just on reflection, you all know me from coming here a month ago, and so I took that opportunity to meet a few of the staff, which was actually really good exercise. Amy was able to introduce me to people from the internal audit and risk, health and safety, catchments, and finance and IT. So it's quite good just to talk to the people on the ground and sort of hear what's sort of on their priority list, so understand their role and functions. So that was very useful. Thank you for that, Amy. And yes, outside of that, I do attend the OAG webinars, which I know Lyndall saw some you talking about those as well. Yes, they are very useful. The last one was just in the last week, and we had the ex-commissioner of the IRD talking, and she spoke about the big transformational change project that they put in there that we worked on for a couple of years. I think at the time was one of New Zealand's largest sort of change projects in terms of dollars spent anyway. On reflection in terms of some of the key points that were mentioned, on the governance side, they did say, you know, one of the key things that you've got this large project team going through large transformational change in a government department. And one of the key things that the governance did and enabled them to do was, when it came to making some core decisions, the governance to always think about those strategic objectives about why they were doing the project in the first place. Because often the staff who are in that project day to day and in the detail couldn't see the wood through the trees. And so when they came up to make decisions at that governance level, for those people around that table to sort of be able to stand back and just say back to them, the reason we're doing this project was for these three things. And that just really helped steer them in the right direction. So reflection, I thought it was very good. It was very good here. All right. Did anyone else have anything they would like to mention in terms of?
Well, just briefly, a couple of meetings I've attended in the last couple of weeks. Probably you had a little bit of bearing. One was the Great South Adelaide strategic session, and we've got what we're talking about at the moment. It was a very useful session to actually drill down to actually why you were there and why you're doing things. And I think for any organisation, it's a pretty useful thing to do, and probably pretty useful for this committee. I saw a little bit of publicity on the changes with the local government reform package yesterday, not a lot. It wasn't as clear as I'd hoped it might have been. But again, there will be strategic and financial conversations to be had at some stage going forward, depending on what government we've got in the next 12 months and whether they decide we've got an appetite to move with it.
Yeah, I think it's Nicole. I'm sure the that report that came out yesterday on the reforms will be food for thought for many. So, next item on the agenda, election of deputy chair of the committee. So I'm just going to move to page 11 of my pack, which talks about that. So
I'm happy to nominate Lyndall Ludlow.
Second that, Mr. Chairman.
Any other nominations? So, voting, by show of hands, do we or do we?
Almost all there.
Do we just say? Or it's a mover and seconder, and that's it. Yes.
In this case, only one. So I think by acclamation, we're actually endorsing. So,
Endorsing, fantastic. We go.
Thank you.
Right. So, in terms of the agenda, we have got a slight change to the agenda today. We have got our external auditor here to talk about the audit plan, and that was going to be in public excluded. And Anthony has got a flight to take, so his original timing for public excluded later on in the afternoon wasn't going to work. So we're going to have to move him forward. But that also means we're going to have to come out of public, move into public excluded. So anyone is online, just like to say that apologies for the late change in the agenda, and we probably will be about 30 minutes before moving back into public. So that's.
The reason to move into public excluded business is to deal with item 5, the Deloitte audit planning report. The reason for passing the resolution is to prevent the disclosure of use of official information for improper gain or advantage.
Second.
Yep.
We thought we were doing last night.
So we have confirmation that we are back in public view, which is great. Thank you very much. Apologies to anyone who was waiting. So our next agenda item, of which we have the general manager presenting us
Yes.
item 1.
Yes, that's me. And I'd like to invite Paul LaRue
to the table. We, with apologies from Tania Cribb, who's our risk assurance and internal audit officer, who was unable to be with us today, but will be presenting the report with me checking it. So Paul, we've got a couple of items in the risk space for Paul to be talking to us about. The first one is about the activity that we've got going on, developing up our risk program of work, and then item number 2, when we get to it, we'll be talking about our top risks, which is a piece of work that we have been doing with the committee and with council and with the executive in the background. Paul, thank you.
So take the report as read. Just a couple of key things and from a risk management perspective, just to refresh and remind everyone's memories that we are on this journey, and as we move along this journey, we look at tightening up particularly some of our risk management processes and so on. So particularly around our risk management framework. And that framework is looking both from a top-down and a bottom-up view as such. Top-down being, an organizational-wide approach, whereas the bottom-down is more kind of coming from, from the bottom-up, from the executive, from our officer, and from, the sort of internal audit process as such. As far as our framework goes, we are working at getting that framework tightened up and tidied up. What we've just gone through is an exercise with our general managers, is looking at their particular risk items in their, their top risks as such that have been identified. That's a process that we've gone through with all of our general managers, and that's been a very good exercise to help inform our consequence table in particular. So just making sure that our consequence table is calibrated to the right scale as such. So that's been a very useful exercise so far. There's still work to be done in that space. There's still a few bits and pieces that we still need to tie up from that perspective. The next piece I would like to talk is just about our business continuity plan. So a lot of activity in this space. We had Kestrel Group come in and assist us with developing that business continuity plan. Thus far, we've uncovered about 62 processes, critical processes that need a contingency plan or a contingency procedure to basically help us work around that particular critical process as such. We still, to date, we've pretty much got one team just to follow up on, just to get a final review of that, and then they'll all be pulled together into our business continuity plan and presented and calibrated by the executive as such. Doesn't mean that we'll come out with 62 at the end of it. There might be some calibration towards the end of the process just to make sure that we've hit those critical processes correctly. Any questions?
I'm firstly really pleased to see the next steps and quite a tight time frame for that, because it feels like it's taken us a while to get to this point. So I'm pleased that August's looking pretty good. But my question is, can you put the 62 in perspective for me? Because it sounds like a lot, but I'm not sure whether that's actually a lot, because I've got nothing.
Yeah, good.
Organisationally, size-wise, is that a lot?
That's a fair question. So I wouldn't say from, and we're just taking experience from Kestrel themselves. We've worked with councils similar size to us. 62 is not a extreme number at all. And from what I can tell, it's kind of the average. However, if there's opportunity to group some of those critical processes and try and reduce the number as such, you will obviously use that as an opportunity to reduce that number. But as far as I'm aware, the 62 is not an unusual number.
I'll just just sort of following on from that. In terms of someone having that sort of critical lens over the top of it, to ask if those are the truly critical ones, because I'm sure there might be some sort of time, cost, effort put into them in terms of making sure that they are ready when the time is needed. What is sort of that lens that comes in over the top? And I guess I ask that question because I know most people in any team will sort of say, oh, my process is critical.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I look at it, definitely the executive team must be given an opportunity to kind of have a look at those critical processes, because, what might be, as you say, is there a bit of bias towards one individual or part of the organization? They might see it as critical, and it might not necessarily be seen as critical through the lens of the executive, for example. So I think there is opportunity for some calibration, and I would suggest that the executive might come back with some questions around some of that. And there will be a process of toing and froing and negotiating the criticality of some of these processes.
Okay. Yeah, great.
And remember, these processes, they might not all kick in, all 62 in one file swoop. It could just be a selection of the processes that might be impacted by a particular event.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to Paul's point, as part of the building our risk management framework, having those discussions and having that debate is really important, so we can develop that common view about what is or isn't at risk, and the severity of otherwise of the risk. So it's an inherent part of developing our risk management maturity, is to go through the process and not only identify the items, but have the discussion and the agreement at this table, at the executive table, and within the organisation as well.
Give us a flavour of what one or two of them might be, just so we can sort of understand. Just.
I can talk to my own, being in the health and safety space, particularly around things like notification of significant incidents. So that's kind of a critical process in the sense of that, if we start and we kind of calibrated it to the sort of 5, up to the 5-day period. So anything that, if not dealt with within 5 days, starts becoming a critical process. So things start falling over and it's difficult to recover from that. So, so particularly in the health and safety space, significant incident or event where potentially there's been a fatality, something not being able to notify our regulator could be a critical process that we'll need to have a workaround as such. Typically IT systems and things like that failing, so numerous key software packages that if they are out for X number of days does start impacting further down the line. So difficult to recover from that.
And from a community point of view, things like our ability to maintain our hydrology monitoring, river levels, things that the community are counting on us for, which have critical outcomes if they don't happen, would also be other items which are semi-dependent on the IT as well, but actually as a specific process is important that we maintain that level of service delivery in that time frame period.
Oh, I know do you want to keep on talking about your papers?
Yes, I'll move straight into the next one, which is around our organisational risks. So once again, take the report as being read.
We're going to need to move your paper.
Was there anything else you want to talk about on that? Was that so on that paper, do we have from the table? Do we have any other questions? Boris? No.
Happy to move the recommendation.
All right, have a move. Yep, Nicole, seconder. Morris, in favour? Aye. Great. Right. Yes, let's jump to the next one. So that's
might jump the gun there.
we're just very related. They are
coming down from our exercise over at EMS this morning. So right. So the next one is around the quarterly risk report as such. So I take that report as being read. I guess the key things coming out of this report is that we have now taken all those top risks as such, and we've now started to do a bit of a deep dive or a deeper dive into the actual risk itself. So been working with the executive team to start running through their bow ties, looking at the consequences and the causes. And from that, which was a really interesting exercise, was actually starting to apply some of our tools, so our risk ranking tools, and actually risk ranking our risks as such. Now that's quite a subjective process. that will require some further calibration once we get that through the executive, because there might be some toing and froing around, particularly the risk ranking of our particular risks. So the next step going forward, once we've taken all our GMs through all of these, all of their assigned risks, it'll then go through a bit of a calibration with the executive to just make sure that we're hitting it on mark as such. And then, then there's an opportunity then to take each one of those risks into a deeper dive as such, and give us the opportunity to bring those back to the committee for feedback and assessment as such.
And Amy, you like to?
So in the paper alludes to this, we did make the commitment to come back last time round with a couple of those risks for a deep dive. And the reason that we haven't done that is because we haven't got that communal view of the risk as yet. And as we've explained, that's part of the process. And what we didn't want was to come with perhaps a singular view that was not the view of the organisation, and having used a tool that we hadn't calibrated. So that is why that piece of work is not back to council. But we've just been nearly there week after next in terms of having had all of those meetings and conversations, and be in position to bring that back to executive for that view. And so definitely next meeting we'll have done that, so we can have that conversation, those deep dives with council on those two areas that you identified that you wanted to seek more information about in the first instance.
Cool.
I guess any time a government's looking at a page and there's quite a bit of red on it, does ring alarm bells. I'm just trying to get your head around assessment metrics, which under almost certain it looks like it's very risky, but I'm not quite sure how that actually.
Yeah, Paul, do you want to explain just the matrix definition table that you've got there, just in terms of how?
Yes,
yep.
Sitting behind this is some prompts particularly around our consequences. So looking at our consequences in particular, plus the likelihood, so your left-hand column, ultimately then meeting it to a point where whoever's assessing it is comfortable, then gives it that number as such, and then that number then feeds into either one of the low, medium, or high or extreme risks.
So I think just to answer Nicole's question, that table you're looking at, which is red, is not is not saying that we have a lot of things that are red. That's saying that's the tool they use to view it.
Yeah,
and then apply. Yeah.
That's relief when I look at almost certain. And,
yeah, we don't have 8 we don't have 8 in the top.
Well, we don't know yet. I think is the point. But in the spirit of the conversation that we had when we started to identify the risks, these were things that were exercising council and exercising exec as things that we needed to attend to. So the exercise that we're going through at the moment is to actually work out, well, where do they sit in terms of the level of risk that they hold, and then what do we need to do to manage that level of risk and reduce it to a level that we're comfortable with, and if we can't reduce it, to accept or mitigate some other way.
Jeremy.
Yeah, just in regards, I was just looking through the risk treatment matrix, and just in regards to the high, that level 4 or 5, and reporting to the chief executive, is there? I would have thought if it's a high and getting to that stage, that there would be a connection back to the governance. Like at the moment, it has to be in the red in regards to this. I thought it'd be just natural.
Yeah.
Indicating because like there's probably been times that I know a situation that we probably could have, even if the chair had known or something, just in regards to what was going on, the risk involved. And when I look back to community and stakeholders having trust and confidence in the council, this was a major thing, and we didn't.
And
we could have added a wee bit of communities and what's.
And to add that, just because something's coming out as high, it doesn't necessarily mean that this committee doesn't get to see that, because obviously it's about what exercises this committee at the same time. So something that is potentially high, if we need to recalibrate that, and I guess this is sort of a piece of work that's still, comes off the back of all of this, is also trying to understand the risk appetite of this committee. And, if the risk appetite of this committee is calibrated to a lower level, or whatever it is, those highs could definitely filter all the way through to this committee. Absolutely. No, I think there's always that opportunity.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Jeremy.
Well, there is an example, but I won't go into it, but it's just a point of, sometimes it's good to have heads up and understand, it might not look like a risk sitting looking at things, but if you have to go to the public on a certain thing, that there will be some, if it's not done right. Yeah.
And so your specific ones around new risks.
Yeah,
that-
well,
that arise.
actually, within
Yeah.
the context, this is about this committee and that, but there's actually risks all of a sudden turn up, bang, how do we deal with that? I'm just sort of saying, if it got to the CEO, that's getting quite a high risk in the context, and how does that, just give a heads up, what's going on?
Yep.
I don't know, you just sort of really high the process.
Understand. Yep. I think, sorry, Boris, yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Jeremy referred to this a minute ago. I just wondered what you are doing to ensure that the community and stakeholders have trust and confidence in the council as an organisation. Can you tell me what, so I see you've got the policy drafted. What does that contain, and what are you going to do to ensure that they do have trust and confidence?
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably out with the specific role of Paul to go into that level of detail, and ideally that we would, as part of the deep dive, we would get the relevant GM who's responsible for that to come in and talk to that in more detail. We can get a response to that if you like, as part of the action for that, but I don't have a comprehensive response for you.
Well, I would
in regard to that. Yep.
It's very important. The submitters to our annual plan have referred to the fact that we are not trusted by the community at the moment. Whether that's just their own personal view or whether it's widely held is a bit unknown. So, I think that we do need to know what we're doing and how well we are doing in that area.
Response for you on that.
Yep, and most certainly just to add to Amy's point, exactly when we come for that, after having conducted the BOCI, the risk assessment and so on, attached to this is that BOCI assessment. And in that will definitely be some of those controls around what we're doing. So, without having BOCI in front of me, it's quite difficult to give you a precise answer. But that would definitely, that's part of the deep dive that comes back to this committee. So we have an opportunity to have a look at that BOCI.
And illustrate, can I just build on that and say, and that's not to say that we're not doing nothing or not doing anything in the meantime. It's just that I'm not well used to be able to speak to that program for you in terms of what we are doing in that space. That's the first thing. So there is a program of work that is there, but the second part is, what are the extra bits or the other things that we're doing specifically to mitigate the risks? So I think there's probably two pieces of work that we can talk to in response to that.
Lyndall.
Yeah, thanks. Just Jeremy picked it up actually. I guess the last paragraph in the report's really what I kind of partially answers my question, I think. And that there's two parallel universes. There's the governance universe and the staff universe, mostly heading in the same direction. So I guess my question is how we continue to connect those two pieces of work so that if councillors feel that there's a higher priority on something that we want alerted to early, how we shape that up so that it's a living, breathing, moving beast. And I know that happens, but we just are not at that point yet, I guess. But the two pieces of work will help alleviate some of those kinds of concerns, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so and absolutely. And I mean, I think that, as you said, it is about finding that right calibration as such. And then the other thing is also, obviously we'll be seeking to assure you. So, as the governance group as such is to provide you that assurance. So, absolutely, from your perspective, questioning and asking the questions is most probably vital in being able to, get that right balance.
I would suggest that there's some education required for all of us so that we know which questions are the right ones to ask.
Absolutely. Amy?
Oh, yeah, and so to build on Paul's point and probably to add to Lyndall's point as well. So having the conversation, and Paul talked about this before, about risk tolerance and, having that joined up conversation with the executive is an important part for us building our risk framework as well and getting that properly operational. And yet, absolutely supporting governance to make sure that they're asking the right questions is a good one. And just in relation to that, the Office of the Auditor General, often their website has a lot of really, really good material. And as Andrew alluded to earlier, they often provide presentations and are learning and training for those involved in this space. And there's also, I think I've talked about it at Broader Council before, the Arcona learning platform as well, which can support governors in new roles.
Yes, just a response to Morris's question about, I guess, public perception. I guess feedback I've been getting in recent times is that this organisation it's more front facing. It's, at the end of the day, we're regulated, but people have a right to think that we will be consistent and will be approachable. And so actually, it's probably not just a staff thing, like we do an annual survey, but actually getting some governance feedback when we're doing those checks is probably quite good, because people don't always tell the staff that so it's just it's a way of getting those checks and balances in place.
So, thank you, Paul. Certainly, this committee is titled Risk and Assurance, and so what you've just talked about in terms of how the framework the organisation has to identify risk and then manage it, and then our role as governance is pretty important. I know you guys as a committee have been working on it for a while, but it's pretty pivotal. I absolutely like to role of this committee. Strategic risks that are really going to knock this organisation off its perch. That's sort of our thinking. We want to make sure that staff are managing their operational risks. So out there on their projects and their day-to-day, we need to make sure they have a process for managing those. But really those big ones that could knock us off our perch are what sort of our minds will likely be set at. And you can sort of see what's coming through there at the moment in terms of, like Nicole mentioned earlier, local government reform, impact of more severe weather events. But you can get ones that are around delivery, in terms of a non-deliverable organisation can become a strategic risk, it can bubble up. So, yes, very pertinent. All right. So we'll have a mover and a seconder, please. Yep, Jeremy, thank you. And Morris, all in favour? Aye. Much more, but stay there because let's see you on for the next as well. Yep. On safety.
Yeah, so I take the health and safety which was read. I don't have too much really commentary around the report itself, so happy to take questions.
Looking at the nail incidents, we're looking at the root cause of it. It wasn't a root, it was a nail.
All right, Jeremy.
I just taken the contractor, a digger, was it? Heading power lines or something like that.
Yeah, it was a digger and a articulated truck.
Yes.
With its bucket up.
All right. You smart.
And the number 2 there being a pertinent number with that contractor.
Yes.
Yeah, the same contract.
Same one.
Okay.
So, reviewing the processes.
Yeah. We just like to touch on that for us in terms of just
Yes, so as said, within a couple of days, the same event happened. So it was an overhead cable running from a power line to a shearing shed. The first incident was a digger operator that went through without his bucket lowered enough. And this was after they were actually reminded that this cable was there. And several days later, an articulated truck was asked to dump load at a certain point, and the operator chose to unload its load in the wrong place. And whilst pulling away, so with articulated trucks, you need to pull forward to let whatever's in the back slip out further, and pulled forward. And whilst it was lowering, took it through the cable. So, I mean, the contractor in both incidents were pretty quick to respond. I mean, they responded immediately with some sort of kind of more sort of formal hard barriers, but clearly not enough for this articulated truck driver to not make the same mistake. Subsequently, after that, went back to the controls that were initially put in and made those a bit more robust, particularly around demarcation, a bit more around the traffic flow itself. And I think there would have been some pretty robust conversations at the toolboxes in the mornings about, being aware. And this was the one and only cable on the entire work site that was crossing an access track.
Joel?
Obviously a little bit of a pattern here. Last year, pretty much. Correlation in that amount of projects that the news has got going on, or what do you think's the correlation there?
I think it's, I think the contractor, I think, has been particularly wanting to keep us happy and sweet and pleased. And hence they've been very, very good at reporting and so making sure that they're reporting these things. And they've been very upfront about it. Since then, we haven't had any issue with that contractor, regarding any sort of safety incidents. So I think they definitely got the message. There's been a bit of a structural change within the organisation also, and they've got a new site supervisor brought on board. So I think there's been definitely improvements made, and there's. Whether it's going to happen again, one can never say no, but I would hazard a guess that they would be pretty sure any site that they're working on now is well assessed around particularly overhead cables.
Ross?
Yes, I'm just looking at those charts on page 23. Comparison with the last 3 years, with the blue and yellow being last year or this year, and the blue being the previous year and green being the 2021. It does look like there's been a slight increase, with the yellow bars being more prominent than the other coloured bars. Is that because we're a larger organisation, because we're doing different stuff, or because we are not being as careful as this time?
So,
or is there more just a natural variation?
So I'm looking at that as actually a good news story. So, I think it was identified quite early last year that we were most certainly not doing a hell of a lot of near-miss reporting. So our near-miss reporting was very, very touch and go. It was very little near-miss reporting coming through. And, and I think, to the credit of the executive, pushing it down to their operational managers saying, okay, we've got to start reporting these near misses. We've got to actually look at reporting our incidents, no matter how small you might think that incident is. Let's report it. Let's give it the due diligence. Let's give it the next, that right lens. So, when I look at those results, absolutely, there's been quite a significant spike, which for me, as I said, is a good news story, because I think now we're actually starting to really report, actual numbers, and those numbers are coming through that are going to be a bit more realistic, and gives me a lot of confidence that, the organisation is starting to take their incidents a lot more seriously.
Yeah, and just to add to that, also remembering that 2020, 2021, we were in COVID. So there were periods of time during that year where there was less activity going on. So probably the green there from those years maybe not under reports, but it just reflects the fact that there was less work going on, relatively speaking.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask if it was an increase in reporting that was resulting in those numbers or not, so that's been.
Sure.
A couple of things, equipment failure, is that the user issues or issue gear? You know, an R&M thing, equipment failure doesn't sound good. Thing which metal to the person using it.
Yeah,
And also just quickly intimidation, like you've had a couple more. I'm just always interested, is it in-house here or is it actually out on the?
so the case reported for this last quarter has been all internal, so it's been through phone call type intimidation. Yeah, equipment failure is quite a funny one because lumped into our equipment is some of our applications that we use, namely our Get Home Safe application that we use on our phone. And a large majority of our equipment failure has been, we've had some TV issues with some of the features of our Get Home Safe application. So there's been a couple of cases where the application, the features on the application haven't necessarily worked, and we just raised that as an incident, just so we're giving it necessary diligence and to be able to push it back to our provider to say, hey, fix it. Saying that, I just want to reassure everyone that fundamentally the application itself, what it's meant to do, it is doing exactly that. It is the features, some of those sort of add-on features that are potentially failing at times. So some of those sort of kind of user features and such.
Lawrence? I know, so thank you very much for the report and
One more question, I think.
Oh, sorry.
Evans, is there a question online?
Oh, great.
Yes, thank you for that. Just a couple of wee questions regarding this. I see tag and testing is being completed annually. Is this in-house or do we contract that out to an outside contractor?
So we manage it internally, but an external contractor does the actual tagging for us.
I know it can be a huge cost to any industry. That's why, sometimes the cost is so large that it's easier actually to do it in-house or cheaper. Also, with regards to the incident reporting, what sort of software are we using, and is this available to all team at all time for them to report incidences? And also through the induction process with contractors, is this available?
So we don't actually have a bespoke incident reporting software as such. We still use a very manual process.
Okay.
We've got a quick report system through our GIS system called Survey 123, which is just a quick report which can be done in field, and people can take photographs and things like that and attach it to the incident. But usually, if it's an incident that requires a bit more investigation, that usually gets then brought into a more sort of formal form as such, which is just a handwritten form. So at the moment, we're very much on a manual process as opposed to an all singing or dancing digital system. So to answer your question, now our contractors won't have access to that.
Okay. Is there the possibility of us looking at a program? I know in the industry I'm in, we use Eco Portal, and it's extremely good for any one person at any time to notify of incidents as near misses, and as checkups as well, triplicate. And the other thing would be, with some of these contractor incidences, is our induction process for contractors of a high enough standard, or is it also a very manual process?
Yeah, I think it's just to answer your first question, absolutely, or your first comment around the system. Yes, absolutely, we are looking at a sort of a kind of all-encompassing health and safety digital system. And there's some really good products out there, and most certainly, I know Amy and myself often have discussions about this, and we are looking to procure that at some stage potentially. Just going back to the induction side of things, so hand on heart, I've got to say, there's always opportunity for improvement around induction for our contractors. We do rely heavily on our contractors to perform their activities out in the field. We are often very reliant on their systems, which we do pre-qualify and check and make sure that they do have that capability. So, often it's about the contractor undertaking the inductions because they almost ring-fence the operational site themselves. And part of our sort of communication consultation, part of the PCB arrangements, the induction is often run by the contractor themselves. However, saying that, our work supervisors are often part of that, and most certainly are part of some of those inductions. But I acknowledge most certainly there's opportunity for improvement.
Thank you for that. It is extremely important with contractors that it's not left to them to have control of a task or a job that we are contracting them for. It is our responsibility. Nothing worse than a couple of WorkSafe people walking into our offices. The liability is quite huge. It's happened before. Even a nice visit can just be the first visit. So
Absolutely.
it's just, it's a very big issue and can get quite expensive quite quickly.
Absolutely. No.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Can I so just sort of dovetailing onto that, I'm sure that so health and safety of contractors and sort of program around that. We one of sort of the key risk areas within health and safety. And so I just noticed in your report how you've got that as one of the actions from your Avid Plus, I believe, sort of work to identify critical risks, specifically around health and safety, and then sort of to say how we're going to manage or mitigate and have a bit of a work program around those. Perhaps we might see that one come back when we have those critical risks presented back to us in terms of contractors and contract prevention. Because I guess certainly from my view of your report, fantastic to see all the activity that's happening within health and safety in terms of the training that's going on, the awareness, just the reporting and the investigations, and then the other pieces I think about is around the risks and managing them. And I think we'd all probably know what the risks are for this organisation. It is around aggressive behaviour of staff out on the field, vehicle travel, and then you might have, I'm not too sure what goes on here in terms of firearms or chemicals or something else as well. So there might be sort of just some ones that I think everyone would think of. So seeing those play back, and then your work program around addressing those, because that's would be ongoing. That would be great to see sort of.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, we're applying, a lot of thinking around that, particularly as you've mentioned, those sort of kind of top critical risks for us. You've mentioned quite a few of them. There's a few others, and contractors is one of those ones that maybe in the past wasn't necessarily acknowledged as a critical risk, but is most certainly emerging, particularly now that we've stepped into a different. Into a different field where we're actually starting to do quite a lot in the construction phase, part of the organisation that we haven't necessarily done in the past. So, bringing in, bigger contractors that are doing some pretty meaty pieces of work for us. So,
yeah, and our responsibilities.
And we'll most probably be applying quite a lot of the the risk methodology that we've really spoken to about over here. We'll be applying that to our critical risks. Looking at bow ties, we've really done a bow tie around our vehicles and driving. The next one on the cards as such is our remote and loan working. So starting to work through those bow ties also.
Okay, John.
Look, I know we brought up compliance before, Jeremy. I'm not going into that. It's just purely in health and safety. Around the 15-minute heads up before on farm. Where are we sitting on that? Look, I can say from experience, 3 times this season we've been visited. I've been on farm, no one else has been on farm. But obviously the site visits carried on, which I'm comfortable with. But at the same time, there's no one there to hold their hand to make sure the heads on the farm were being managed. So where does this group sit on that?
Yeah, so I mean, look, it already built into a lot of our processes, particularly for our compliance teams and our teams that are going out and visiting farms and properties. We started to mature a lot more in that space, particularly around prompting, having sort of checks that we prompt ourselves. And one of those prompts is exactly that, is making sure that, we're making contact with farm managers and so on, and making sure that we're actually getting inducted onto the farm itself, if there's an induction, or at least starting to the process of having some sort of signing process and having that discussion. So, the incident with the nail in the foot is a real typical example of that, where actually, our person was met the farm manager on site. The farm manager accompanied the individual to the location. Some general hazards were discussed and pointed out. And it was at that point that the farm manager moved into a paddock next door, and the person carried on the inspection and subsequently got injured. But so there was definitely a process already in place there. And I think that's definitely something that our teams are very well.
Right. So the answers more around when the people are present, because if the inspection is going to happen, it's going to happen. But if you're not on farm,
yes, yeah,
and you're an hour's drive away, it's just not going to happen. So so that incident happened with the president, the farm manager present. So I see some real risk there. That's all. If there's actually physically no one on farm, that's part of the operation.
What I get Paul to.
Yeah, it's a really good question. As I understand, I can't quite quote the section, but under the RMA, when you're compliance officer, you're undertaking an investigation, our health and safety protocols would override that of somebody else's. So in the sense, if we're going onto site for an inspection, we have to do our own due diligence to make sure that we don't need somebody else's permission per se to go onto the property. Not a dwelling, but the actual land.
Yeah, that's not my concern. It's more than our exposure as council.
Yeah, so we have to do that take 5 approach. We don't, we wouldn't just go wandering onto a site. So these incidences were like, maybe a deer farm and it's in the middle of the, a particular part of that season where it would be stupid to go onto a paddock. So we need to make those all assessments, but our own protocols need to be defined up front. So as a kind of a normal practice, we refer to a take 5. We wouldn't just wander onto site. So especially important when responding to incidents, because you've got to know where you're going. Is there any indications on the system before you went out there? What time of year it is, what type of farm it is, or industry it is. So we would have to do that, but our own health and safety process will override that. It doesn't change the fact, though, from a customer-centric perspective, that we might choose not to go on to the property and wait for that farm and or the labourer or the owner to be there.
Yeah. I was like, perhaps helps because we not be able to do the induction. So it's on you, mate.
So the preference would be you wouldn't do it. The preference would be that you would wait for the owner, the manager to be there with you because they know the site. But if it was a case of you needed to go on site because it was an investigation or an incident, then our own checks would kick in. Our own assessment.
And so the important part is to get, so there is a defined protocol that staff are aware of.
Yeah, refer to it as a take 5, basically. It's the stuff that you do before you leave the office, basically.
Jeremy, did you?
Yeah, no, it's probably just been clarified there, but and we're obviously looking at inspections, bits and pieces, but it is a good point that businesses have their own health safety, so and it's to understand who overrides who at that time, and obviously there's going to be a bit of discussion in the future about bits and pieces around compliance.
Yep.
So it's probably a good time to be talking about the health and safety too, bringing that into that discussion. So we're all good.
Lyndall?
Thanks. I'm on my faces because I'm a wee bit reluctant to say the word, but because COVID is still with us. And I guess we're not staff aren't under any obligation to inform us, are they, that they COVID. So I'm just wondering whether you're aware, I guess, of any ongoing impacts of COVID on staffing.
Yeah, so funny enough, as we speak today, there's definitely a little bit of a mini wave that's gone through organisation again. As they do, it's these cyclic processes with COVID. You're right, there's no obligation that someone has to tell us, but we're most certainly encouraging staff to let us know, and we keep that obviously as personal information, personal details, so it's not something that can enter our organisation that someone's got COVID, but most certainly, I mean, even if you just look around the building, those that have come into contact with, if they've got COVID in their home, whatever, we're still getting a lot of questions coming to myself and the wider health and safety team, just asking about, what should we do? And, you're still seeing mask wearing and so on happening across the organisation, particularly those that come into contact with someone with COVID. And I think, there's always opportunity just to refresh that. So in fact, we have been that tomorrow in our bulletin, we can put in something just to remind everyone again, that COVID hasn't gone away and there's a little mini wave hitting us again.
Yeah, and some other things that aren't COVID but feel like it.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate your time at the table. So you've got a full cup in terms of what's on the agenda, and it's all pretty important. So appreciate your time presenting to us. Right, do we have to move in second? Yep, Lyndall, you all in favour? Oh, sorry.
The points you raised before about asking about things that need to be addressed, do they need to be included in the recommendation?
Yes, so in terms, you mean around the risks? No, in terms of.
Yeah, well, there are a number of things you talked about in relation to the report.
Yes, in terms of key actions going forward. Yes, so I'm actually keeping a little bit of an actions list here, but is that the best way, or should we put it into something else?
So we could get our democracy services advisor to advise.
Yes.
Thank you, Damien.
Absolutely, through you, Chair. We've moved to, I understand, resolution only minutes. This means if it is not resolved, then it will not be minuted. If you would like an action followed up on, I would strongly suggest that you get confirmation from the person presenting the report that they will follow up with you, or that you will follow up with them yourself afterwards. But if it is not resolved, it will not be noted, and going forwards is highly unlikely to show up on any official actions tracking register. So just please be aware of that going forwards.
So that's what I thought was the case. So we do need to record things that we expect to happen.
Great. Okay. Good. So I think from this one, we do a resolution for this one, specifically around what we expect to see next time.
Yeah.
And around identifying key health and safety risks and the mitigations in place. Is that what we're?
Yes, I think so.
Yep, that was certainly one.
Your exact words now, but
Yep.
I remember you making a list of them.
Yes, so I can, do you draft it, or should I do the wording or what?
I would suggest that perhaps the independent chair has made a list that will be followed up on and will appear on an action sheet for the next meeting, so that we don't lose track of it. I'm happy to move in that direction.
I would do that as well from my point of view, that if we've got an actions register partway through this meeting, changing it halfway through the meeting might not be the most sensible thing, but certainly going forwards, I'd like to move to a more formalised process so things don't get lost in the mix.
Okay, so this,
Mean that there's an action must follow up item.
Yes.
As a chairman's report, but
Yep.
sometimes.
okay, so I'll also have this actions list out of the whole committee meeting. So for this committee,
Yep.
is that what we're saying? And then, or do we want to do this?
Well, I was thinking for to be certain, that should be recorded as part of the recommendation, I think. That recommendation to resolve. We note the health and safety wellbeing management report and to note whatever there were recommendations from.
Yep, should I
I have to report next time on the critical risks in health and safety and the work program around those.
Does that cover everything, did you?
So I think for next time we can do it so it's shown up on the screen and then we can agree on the wording perhaps, but critical risks are identified in the work program around monitoring. Yes, yes, agree. Agree.
Okay, thanks. So
Yes.
we almost agreed to that, but I think I might have interrupted
Yes.
the time, so.
No, I have a
I'm happy to move that recommendation with that amendment.
fantastic. Not in a second. Thank you. All in favour? Great. All right. Thank you. Yeah, Todd. Good to have that clarified. So it's okay. Last item on public is our annual activity plan. So Amy, I believe.
So this is a reasonably standard meeting hygiene item, just to reflect what is coming up. We have highlighted in blue things that might be changing, or have changed. So the first thing I just want to bring your attention to is you'll see for our CCOs that they were highlighted in blue. We did have down from last meeting that we would bring through the statement of intents for these various CCOs. The statement of intent actually is probably a performance or strategy related matter, and yes, and that's what I'm saying. So they've gone through to a different committee, but we would still look, I think, from a risk point of view, to invite members from the CCOs to come and talk to this committee going forwards about the risks that they manage in the organisation and how they might shoot through to us by virtue of the fact that they are CCOs. So we'll develop a program of attendance for our CCOs around those issues going forwards. So we'll just and just noting there, we'll have a conversation about the annual reports as well, and whether that's a good time for everyone to come to talk to us, or whether we would like to just phase them so we've got one per committee. Also would like to acknowledge that we do have a new chair, and so after this meeting today, we'll get some feedback in terms of whether there's anything else, either in terms of items or timeframes that we might want to consider that will bring forwards on the next annual activity plan as well.
Okay, any questions on that plan? Okay, all right. Mover and seconder. John, Jeremy, thank you. All in favour? Aye. All right, so that brings us to the end of public session. And we could move to go into public exclusions. That's what we're going to do next, is it? Do we have a cup of tea after that? All right, so the mover seconder. Yeah, thank you, Jeremy and John. And all in favour? Aye, and we'll get, I had to reread it now.